And not that you needed anything more to get involved in, but you also had your own podcasts, Burgers,
Mhm.
Beers, and Books. And is that something that's on ice at the moment? Tell us a little bit about that podcast.
Yeah, it's on ice, and it's simply because of time, man. Like I just ran out of time to write, and that's the thing I love the most. And I found I was doing more outside of writing, so I've just put it on pause for the moment. Um, yeah, but it was run through Words and Nerds podcast, which is I think one of Australia's best podcasts with Danny V, and I think just the amount of content she puts out with like high quality interviews and all these different focuses as well. She really gives the space for authors, I think.
Mm.
So I loved that, and I got to work with Danny. I pitched her this idea to interview authors about their own favorite books, and I loved doing it, but it just took because I was the one who booked the interviews. I was the one who organized. I mean, you guys know that it takes a lot of work to get in front of get the audio, get the Zoom thing, conference call, and you got to do the editing of the thing and upload the thing and get the thing.
Mm.
And then on top of that, I was reading.
Jack does all that. It's all good.
You're just the talent, Harry. You're just the talent. Um, but it took, and then on top of that, I was doing Ben's book club, and so I was reading every month. It was for this month, next April, I'm reading Candace's books, I'm reading George's book, I'm reading the short story thing, I'm doing a Ben's book club book. That's 4 books in a month. And then on top of that, I was reading more for the podcast. So it got a bit too much, unfortunately. I'd love to do it again. It was a really fun series that I did.
And did you actually sit down and do your interviews at like a pub or a cafe and sort of like a
A
public?
few.
Yeah.
Yeah, a few of them. Yeah, if the author was in Brisbane, I would meet up for a burger and then we just put the little Zoom recorder down. And sometimes the audio was a bit sketchy. I did, while I was on tour with John Lacey, I was in Canberra the same time as Danuka McKenzie. And so then I dragooned her into doing an interview with me. And so we sat down for lunch before an event we were doing that night. And I had driven like 9 hours through the middle of New South Wales. I was just, I don't know, man. Sometimes I make these decisions and I'm like, oh, that's fine. I'll handle that. And then it gets to doing it. I'm like, oh, I'm so tired. But have fun. You only get one go at this sort of life, right? So
Yeah, yeah.
make the most of it.
I just wanted
Just
to
gotta
ask.
go for it.
I just want to ask a question about, as we said, we caught up with you a few weeks ago, where you were a panel member at the Queensland Writer Centre's genre con, and there was even one of the lunchtime sessions was called the Shredder, where anonymous entries of manuscripts or chapters got read out, and you and other judges had to make sort of comment about whether it was
Yeah,
a keeper or it was going to get shredded. Well, that
yeah.
looked like it was a bit of a fun
It
exercise.
was. I actually embarrassingly had a podcast idea based on that. I was going to go to I mean, maybe I still will. I was going to go to the Queensland Writer Centre and say, hey, to get the Queensland Writer Centre name out there, we could start this podcast, a weekly thing called the Shredder, get people to come in and just for 10 minutes each week, I would just read their work out and sort of give my thoughts on it. Still think that's a cool idea, but I think we got, we read, I think about 6 and you feel a bit it's a tricky they're precious those precious words, and people are publicly doing this thing is so vulnerable, but at the same time, much like my publisher, you don't want to mince words and tell someone that this thing smells great when it's not smelling very good at all. And I always find that there's something in their work that you can, this is the thing, that you're doing well. Over here you sort of muffed it up a bit, but this particular thing, let's highlight that. But afterwards we had a lot of them come and approach us and say, oh, that was mine that you read and thank you so much. And we just got a lot of it's when you're writing and you don't have manuscript assessments, you don't have the money for it, you don't have mentorship, it can feel like you're just writing into the, like, I don't know, is it like you read the books, you read other authors, and you're like, is it good? I don't know. You can't see your own work. And so
Mm.
hopefully getting that actual constructive criticism, it gives a sense of direction. And I find that when I get edits as well, I'm like, oh, that's what it is. Okay, I gotta, it gives you something to fix, gives the brain something to work on rather than this big pile of I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think when you get lost in your own words, it's so useful to just get a fresh set of eyes on it and a fresh perspective.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. You need it. And much like in the band when you would, present a riff or something, and then your guitarist would look at you and be like, all right, well, we'll go and see what it sounds like. And you take it into the master bedroom where we turned it into our band space, and you just jam on it for half an hour and see if it goes anywhere, see what happens. And then eventually they don't even need to say anything. It's you, and you go, yeah, this isn't actually that good. I get it. And they don't say that to you, but they show you. And I don't know, that sort of the humility to see the things in you that you're creating that maybe aren't as effective, I think is a really useful thing. And it's okay to say you're not always at your best, and we're not.
Mm. Mm.
Do you ever obviously going the publisher route? Do you ever send out earlier manuscripts to beta readers or anything like that?
Yeah, I still do. And I choose the people I send them to differently each time. And I don't know why I change each time, because I get some great feedback from different people. But every time I've sent them to completely different beta readers, and I get a variety of different responses. And, for John Lacey, I had one friend named Tim, who I named a character after because he was so important to me, and that character gets shot in the face. So you can. he was what I like to call my red pen editor. So he would say, you need to print this out for me, and I would send him a printed out one from Officeworks, and he was just like, I'm cutthroat with my stuff, but he was more cutthroat, and he would just circle this bit and go, lazy, cross, cross, cross. Don't need that. You said that more effectively up there. That's all superfluous. And he just made it lean and mean. And I love him. I loved him. But I shot him in the face in the book.
Editors, or revenge against the editor. Yeah, the final say.
Yeah, and in Snake Island, my high school bully is in that book. Big, stupid idiot. In the book. I'm sure in real life he's lovely now. In the book, he just, What can I tell you?
Hey, Ben, I'd like to now move on to some specific aspects of the writing craft. And this is something we discussed in the planning for this podcast. And there was a few topics broadly that you suggested that you'd like to talk about. Now, the first one we probably touched on a little bit, but the way you put it is writing from instinct and how it can aid a novel. So what do you mean by that, by saying writing by instinct?
Yeah, we've talked about it a little bit, but it is, I always feel when we're having discussions on panels and stuff where they talk about you're either a pantser or a plotter, I find that I don't think that those are two separate things, and you're not one or the other, and you might lean more heavily towards one or the other. But even like a Jane Harper who writes, like, I think, an 80,000 word plan before she writes a word of the book, so she's meticulous with how much she plans, but even she is creating as she's going. And the most loosey-goosey writer who just writes from the seat of their pants, they'll have some idea of a character or a scene or something that's coming up. But I always feel in those discussions that pantsers because I am a pantser, I'm both. But I feel like the pantser side of me feels a bit like ashamed or guilty, or like, oh, I'm not doing, that's just. But I always think about it this way. Are you the sort of person, if you're going on a trip on a plane for a few days, are you the sort of person who prepares and packs their bag 4 days out and you'll have a list? Or do you wait until 10 minutes before you get in the car and you'll be like, what do I need? And you'll sort of feel your way through, okay, yeah, I'll need this, and you'll go that way. So that's how I sort of see the pantser versus plotter and the instinctual thing. Like, I need to be in the thing to feel the thing. And I find for my own writing that if I'm plotting everything out, it's all up in the mind and it just renders it dead. And it doesn't have a feeling in it. It's just an exercise in intellectualism. But if I'm writing from a place of feeling and response, like seeing how a thing's unfolding and then responding to how that thing's unfolding, that to me is more emotional, more feeling based. And it's not to say I don't have a plan. I have scenes. I have, you have to have some sense of forward progression. You do need to have a sense of where where the book's going. It needs to have a sense of direction. You can't just aimlessly wander around. But I think the most precious thing is when a book feels something, like it feels real. And in the moments where I'm writing, where you can really feel a moment, that's the magic of writing. And so I guess my idea of instinctual writing is I'm just sort of on the side of the pantsers, and it's okay to be a pantser. It's okay. You don't have to apologize for packing 10 minutes before you take off. It's just the way you work. It's just how you know what you need. You need to be in the situation to figure it out.
I'm generally considered a pantser, and that's certainly how I write short stories. But I do recognize that if you're going to do long form writing, something that's actually a novel, that you've got to do some sort of plotting.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it just becomes this wandering sort of long form of a short story. And
yeah, but see, I feel like the wandering is where a lot of the stuff of the book and the story can sort of find itself. And because then, I mean, I think Hemingway says it, right? He says, write drunk and edit sober.
Apparently he didn't, but
Oh, okay. I love that saying.
We'll go with it anyway.
We'll go with it. I think the saying is fair, though. Like,
I love it.
To write with a sense of looseness and to feel it and to let it breathe, let it do this thing. Don't restrict it. Don't be rigid. Don't put your rules on it. Just let it be its thing. But then later, yeah, you do have to come in with your craft, and you have to go, this isn't quite the aim here, and this is a bit, why did I go down this digression? I might just cut that, or I might give this to this other character. And you do absolutely need to come in with your writer's, editor's mind a little bit. But I feel like they are, I don't know whether they're separate, but they're, I find it difficult to be really truly feeling when I'm thinking too much. And yeah.
I'm coming up with a compromise on my current novel, which is the fourth in a series. So it's got to have a lot of things tied up. So it can't just be a wandering story.
Yeah.
And so what I'm compromising with, I'm plotting a general idea of 6 chapters ahead. And
nice.
then I just go, right, off I can go now. So I spend a day coming up with 6 chapters where I want to go with them. And sometimes I digress and go off, and some of the scenes just don't exist because it didn't work. But it is all just very much sitting there pantsering it from within that modicum of a structure.
Yeah, and I think I work similar. Like if you looked at my Scrivener, I pretty much got it set up. So
it uses Scrivener, yay!
Yeah. On the left-hand side, I'm bare bones with it though. It's just structurally. I love to be able to see the whole book. So on the left-hand side, I'll just have, goes into the attic, finds a shotgun, and I'll just have scenes, like really one-word basic stuff. And then I'll flesh them out. And in the fleshing it out is where you really feel it. There's a scene from Snake Island that I always remember doing, that this old father who's wanting to front up to this criminal family. He's driving in the middle of the night, and it's really dark. He's smashed his windscreen with a kangaroo, it's this whole thing. But he comes upon this house, and the house is supposed to be, monolithic, like scary, foreboding. And so as I'm writing, I'm feeling what this house would look like. And I suddenly, in the subconscious of my brain, years earlier, my friend was describing this house near where we lived, and he went up to it and it had a big dead pig hanging from the veranda. And it had been, the hair had been boiled off it, and it was just swaying in the breeze. And so I was like, oh, okay, there it is. There's that pig. And it wasn't like I came up with it. It's like I noticed that it was there.
Yeah.
It was there already. And so I put that pig there, and I thought, oh, yeah, cool description. Later on, there's this scene that happens in the book where the father of this criminal enterprise, he's disciplining his 2 grown children. He's beating his children because the children have done something to endanger their drug cartel. And so they're getting into this fisticuffs, and he pushes his son out onto the veranda, and I just go, I've set this up. There's this
It's a pig.
pig. And then so it turned into, rather than this just like punchy fist sort of thing, which I think can be, it's a bit done. It instead turned into this really gross, visceral thing where the father's like shoving his firstborn's head into the maw of the pig cavity, and there's all this gristle and blood and like viscera, and it was gross, and but it felt like that is a good, interesting scene, and I've never heard of that. And it came out of this place of writing subconsciously. It just came out of, it was like I accidentally set it up. And if I'd thought it through, if I'd gone to that veranda and I thought I need something interesting to happen here, I just don't know if I would have thought of the pig and the weird mushing the head thing.
I think there's often that when, in the English lesson, you're tasked with trying to work out what the author was trying to do there and all this sort of stuff. And in reality, often it's just happenstance. It's like, there was never any real sort of deep, meaningful stuff. It's like somebody's then digesting it afterwards, comes up with all of these things, and you as the author sits back and go, yeah, that's where I was going with that. I'm sure that's what I was thinking.
Yeah, but see, that's the thing. Like, I think these writers are so brilliant because they can do those things that make us feel like they're writing these deep thematic ideas and these deep characters, but they do it in this way that is so intuitive and natural feeling and not forced.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's sort of like this magic thing, hey? And yeah, you think, how often do they think about theme, or how often do they do that sort of thing, or how often are they just writing the story the way they know to write it, and it just so happens that they're brilliant, You don't know.
And what you just talked about, I don't know whether it segues directly into the next point, Ben, that you wanted to talk about. Writing in a state of flow and improvising. Is that a natural sort of progression from what we've just been talking about?
Yeah, it is. And we sort of covered it a bit earlier, but I do feel like, I think we talked about it, I do feel like I'm acting sometimes. Because I do hear authors sometimes say that they're writers. Whether you can hear the motorbike start up next door. The characters come alive and the characters tell them what the book's going to be about. And I don't know whether I'm there. Like, I don't think my characters are living, breathing people, but I do feel like they're all different hats. You can hear it.
Sound effects. Love it.
Thanks. I worked on that pretty hard.
Just incidentally, throughout this whole podcast, I've half the time I've had to mute my mic because my two dogs were wrestling, and the Labrador and the Spoodle it sounded like one of them was killing the other, but they were just playing. So I had to just very promptly.
Done a good job. I haven't heard them at all.
I had to dash off once.
Yeah.
For a few seconds, and then I've had to mute quite a few times.
Anyway, professionalism.
Anyway. Continue.
Yeah, well, I mean, you muted it perfectly. It's the mentioning it now that's turned you unprofessional, Jack. That's what's happened. But yeah, it just feels like it's me wearing different hats, and like I'm improvising. It feels writing feels like acting to me, and it feels like noticing too, like putting these two people in a room, seeing what they'd really naturally say to each other. And it's like I'm watching or listening to this dialogue unfold rather than coming up with the dialogue myself, because I don't think I can do that very well.
I think that's a skill that anyone can develop over time, is listening to other people. I mean, obviously you have to be exposing you have to be out there and listening to other people. You have to be in a situation. Obviously Jack working as a detective, me as a paramedic, we're constantly through our working lives talking to people and listening, and so that always helps with knowing whether, when you write dialogue, whether it sounds right, whether it sounds believable, whether it just doesn't work.
Yeah, and you both, and I think all writers will do this thing where I don't think, like, I don't know how you work, but I never listen to a person and go, aha, I'll take that, and that's now dialogue, and I'll be like, this person said this, and it'll come out. It's never like that. It's just like we're the products of a million conversations that we've had with 1,000 different strange people, and all sits up in the mind. It all sits up in there. All sits up in your sternum, And so when it comes to write, it's just like every interaction you've ever had in your whole life is pouring out of you.
And it's just a magical moment when that dialogue just feels like it's clicking, and you get immersed in that exchange. Say it's between two characters. And I was working today on editing after my current manuscript came back from the manuscript assessment, and there's a couple of pages where it's quite intense dialogue between these two characters. And I remember when I wrote it, I just got on the flow, and it just seemed to click and flow nicely. It's
Yeah.
interesting though when the editor sort of said, look, you probably need to put a few dialogue tags here to remind the reader of
Who's
who's
who.
speaking. I'm thinking about, I feel like I've done that, and that's what we said before that, a good writer should be able to distinguish between who's speaking. By the way, they've spoken, but there's only two characters, so I didn't want to interrupt the flow by putting in action tags or dialogue tags, and felt that it had flowed nicely. But it's interesting when an editor looks at those sort of things, and maybe they've got certain bugbears that they'll focus on.
Yeah, it is interesting. You always find that, hey, when another set of eyes looks at your stuff, you'll find their feedback. It's always subjective. No matter how we try to objectively look at this craft, it's always our tastes coming in. Like I'm a big fan of show don't tell, and I get to the point where I don't do any inner thoughts at all. Like I don't like people thinking to themselves, but I often find like that's to the detriment sometimes of other people's work, and I'm reading their stuff, I'm like, oh, this person does it really well. Like we're all, again, like I remember trying to write the acknowledgements for To Become a Whale, and I was like, I have to write about the high school bullies, I have to write about my teachers, I have to, I am a product of every person I've ever interacted with, and they're all in those books.
Could be a very long acknowledgement.
Yeah. It is funny too. Like, I don't know how often you feel like this when you write like a really good line, like a line that you could like, that could be in a movie. And it's, it's rare, but when you write it or you read it back, you're like, ooh, I was good that day,
Yeah.
That was, yeah.
It's interesting that the comment you made about putting in so that whoever's the speaker, or it's in this particular character's point of view, and putting in their internal thoughts. This is another thing my editors come back with a few times, and most of the time I would agree that yes, there might be a notation saying, what is the character thinking right now? You need to explain that to the reader. Other times I think, oh, I thought that I'd conveyed that in the way that they acted and what they said and how it fit into the context of the conversation. But it's
Yeah.
interesting when an editor comes in, looks at that with fresh eyes and says, at this point, it would help the reader if you explain what
Yeah.
the person's thinking or feeling. Most of the time, I think, yeah, look, that is probably going to add value to it. But other times, I think, oh, look, probably on this occasion, I might not, because I think I've adequately covered that in the way that they spoke.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. And it sometimes it is like you just have to be cleverer about it earlier on. There was a note I got on Lacey there. The father in the opening section of the book, he takes on a Wadawurrung mistress. He essentially has a extramarital affair, and his Scottish wife is back in the home, and he's living with the Wadawurrung more and more regularly because he's falling in love with this woman. And so I had this scene where he was trying to explain to his son, like, I love this Wadawurrung woman, and I don't love my wife anymore, your mum. And I just had him say it. I just had him say, yeah, look, I love her, I don't love her. And I had a person I really respect, named Rowan Wilson, who's a brilliant Australian author. I had him read an early copy of it, and he said, well, people in the 19th century wouldn't talk about people like that. Like, I love them, that's that's what we say now. But he also said, that's like, you're just saying the thing. It's like in dialogue, it's not a subtle, interesting way of showing a relationship, because showing is where you feel things. You can read into it, so you feel it. And I'm really proud of this, but I came up with this device that would show the distance between him and his wife and the closeness with him and his mistress. And so I had him with the mistress. The boy heard him fart in the tent, and his mistress and he both start laughing, and she punches him, and it's a cute little thing. And then he farts in his bed at home with his wife, and there's just silence. no reaction to the very hilarious fart. And I'm really proud that I turned a fart into a metaphor for love. But I
Yes,
feel
I
like
remember that. I remember those scenes. Yeah.
yeah. But see, like that's a more interesting way of showing the thing, and it's scarier because I have to trust people. Like I have to trust that the people will notice that because they're chapters apart, like that you notice these two separate things, and that I'm sure people miss it. I'm sure they do, but I think that's a better way of saying it rather than just flatly just saying it. And part of the art, I think, of writing is discovering the subtlety of it and the way you can nudge at these ideas. And it's almost like you're inviting a person to have the idea with you if you write that effectively, versus just telling them what the idea is. And I think that's like less engaging.
Yeah. And again, that's the value of beta readers and editors who can come in with that extra set of eyes and pick up on those little subtleties that perhaps you'll miss yourself when you're reading your own words over and over again.
Yeah. With your beta readers though, you do want to be careful. You want to be close with them, like close enough that you trust what they say, but you also have to trust their taste. And everything they say, you do have to pass it through. And I would say the same thing with publishers and agents and editors. Everything does need to pass back through your understanding of your own thing. So Rowan is brilliant because he didn't say here's a fix for it. He didn't say this is what you need to do. He said I felt like that could have been stronger.
Yeah.
And then that got me thinking creatively. Beta readers who ask questions and like highlight, I love this, but this scene here felt like it was a bit flat. I'm just not sure why. Like if they feel the things and you're like, aha, how do I lock them in for that bit? I think that's really valuable.
Okay, we'll keep pushing on. Now, the other topic we're going to talk about, I think we probably adequately covered it, was planning and pantsing at the same time. I think we've had some good discussion about that. Just to kind of put a full stop on that, I know Harry and I have had discussions around this in previous episodes. And again, I think I sit on the fence with this. I like to have a bit of a backbone and a bit of a structure. As I was explaining to you, Ben, I'm currently writing a manuscript where it's set over 2 timelines and there's alternating chapters, and I'd had to put in a lot of planning for that to actually work. So that by alternating between 2 timelines, it has to work, and you have to have some planning with that. But I'll have my bare bones. But I spend a lot of time daydreaming and thinking about how am I going to add flesh to the bones for that particular scene. So some of my pantsing happens when I'm daydreaming. Other times my pantsing happens whilst I'm writing that chapter. I know what needs to occur in that scene because it's all part of my plan, but I don't know how it's going to happen. And that's the fun part. And I often find that that's where, for me, the pantsing comes in, is that I get a bit of a kick when I go, that's clever. And I've just thought of it and I just write it there and then, even though, I know where the scene or the chapter is going to end, but, adding that extra quality is the fun part.
Yeah, I agree. And and like I said, I do think it's a balancing act of both things. Like, I don't think anyone's purely pantsing or plotting. I just think that in order to write well, you kind of need to do both. And it's sort of where you balance the things and how you work. But, Snake Island has, I think there's like 7 or 8 perspective characters. I think 7. And so I had a big corkboard and I had white cards. And so I would color the cards. And so if you can't just have Vernon and then have him be all over everywhere, you have to give equal weight to all the characters, because it doesn't make sense to just focus on one and then this person's left untended to. So you have to weave them. Like, some stories just sort of lend themselves to that kind of rigorous kind of plotting. Whereas something like John Lacey, it has a structure, but within each, it has 5 or 6 acts. So yeah, it's funny because I can't remember exactly, but it has these big acts. And so within each act is sort of a self-contained little story unto itself. It was less, you didn't have to be as rigorous. I could come up with inventive scenes. I could just insert things in there because I wasn't changing perspective as often.
Okay, cool. Look, there's one more that you had listed here, which, and this is new to me, so I do a bit of Googling this afternoon, where you make reference to the George Saunders iterative process. I've got some notes just to, if I needed to, because Harry knows I like to do this. I like to pretend I'm clever by researching. But I'm going to let you explain this. What do you mean by the George Saunders iterative process?
Yeah, so he wrote this. George Saunders, one of my favorite authors, and he's also a very brilliant speaker about writing. He teaches at a college in America, Syracuse. I don't know. I'm going off the top of my head, but he's a brilliant man, and he wrote Lincoln in the Bardo, which I actually mentioned a bit earlier on. But he wrote this book on creative writing, which I think, for my money, is probably the best creative writing book I think I've ever read. It was the most appealing to me, at least. But it's called A Swim in the Pond in the Rain. A Swim in a Pond in the Rain, I think. Very pretentious title, but it is essentially, he takes 7 Russian short stories from the 19th century and the early 20th century, and he essentially takes lessons from how they're doing what they're doing and what they're doing well. It is some of the most brilliant stuff. And the main thing that he does is that he emphasizes this thing he calls noticing, and sort of notice how these different things are aligning, notice what's happening in this story. But the iterative process, there's a couple of different things with it, but essentially he paints this picture, this metaphor of a person who's making they're in their basement and they've got this huge table and they're making this big city landscape, and they've got this train running through it. You know, one of those big train tracks that people used to have, where they would wear the pretend train conductor's hat and go to town on this big toy, but really labor over it. And he said, imagine this guy, making this scene, and all of a sudden he's putting these little people into this building, and all of a sudden he thinks, well, maybe I'll turn her and face her that way. And there's this woman, and now she's, instead of looking out over the town, she's looking out over this bridge. And he's like, I wonder what she's looking at. And then so he looks over and he sees, oh, hang on, there's another person over there under the bridge, like that old person with a guitar. And what if I just turn his head this way? And he said it's not like he's creating these ideas. It's like he's just noticing things that need to be different. And it's a really interesting, specific way of looking at it. But instead of coming up with this story, he's now noticed a story is unfolding. Because why is she looking over at him? Maybe they were in love once. What does that mean? And there's this whole thing unfolding that he didn't come up with, but that he noticed. And what George Saunders says is that one of the ways that you can do this with your own writing beyond the original process is to go over your stuff over and over and over again with, I forget what he calls it, some sort of sensor, like a spidey sense. He doesn't call it a spidey, I'm making that, but like a spidey sense. But read it with that noticing lens, and then when you come to a part, you're like, hang on, there's something here. That's when you can refine, take a thing out, add a detail, do these little things. And he would just go over and over it, and it would slowly refine itself the more you notice into the perfect little thing that scene is. And so I practice that with all of the things I do, but especially, like, I teach a creative writing course occasionally, and I use this process, but with the opening scene of John Lacey. And I must have rewritten that thing like 150 times.
Wow.
And there was, for a month and a half, it was every day I would wake up, and the very first thing I would do was to read through that. And as I'm reading it, I would just make little changes. Oh, this could be here, this could be here. And every time, new morning, I would go from the start, I would read it again and just notice these little changes, and just add a little frill to her dress, or change a painting and change. And the only reason I stopped going over that scene was because I read it from the start and I got to the finish and I didn't change a word. I'm like, okay, it must be done then.
Must be good.
Yeah.
Must be good. That was probably the one that labored over the most, but I think that scene grew in its strength because of the number of iterations that I let it be. And yeah, it's that idea of noticing stuff that's interesting in your own work. That's instinctual as well. And so that's all credit to George Saunders, who sort of he puts it a lot more eloquently in the book, but taking that process to your own work is really, I think, really fun.
I do actually have a couple of quotes because, again, I'm clever and I've done some Googling. So George Saunders, he said, a first draft doesn't need to be good because it's just a springboard. It's an opportunity to get your thoughts on a subject down on paper, nothing more. It starts with one sentence. He goes on to say that you don't even need an idea to start a story. You just need one sentence to go from that thought to wherever it might lead you.
Yeah, yeah. I'm a big believer in that. I teach the same thing. I might even steal that quote because you don't need anything to start. I think people get stuck on starting. They're like, no, I gotta really research this for another year and a half yet, or I've really got to do this thing. And like To Become a Whale, I literally just had a father and his son, and I just sort of see where it goes. Part of the fun of writing is seeing where it goes.
Hey guys, I think that might be a really good time to wrap up. Ben,
I just have one more question because I
Sure.
believe, from somebody who is very good at interviewing people, I got some advice is that you need to get them at their ease. It may be a bit late, but can you tell us about your tattoos?
Oh, my question.
That might have to be another episode.
Is it a Kraken?
That is a Kraken. That's Mario there.
Yeah.
So Mario is very important to me.
Right.
And then, there's a man on a boat up here fighting the Kraken. But essentially, and there's my home there. So essentially, the Kraken is all the different things in this world that I need to protect my family from. And then I'm the old man in the boat with a big harpoon, still cracking. And then Mario's there because Mario's family to me, man. Like, I remember beating Bowser with my dad when I was 6 years old. I remember playing Mario Kart with my brother when I was a teenager, and I've played all the Marios with my own kids. Like, Mario's family to me, so that's why he's there.
And your tattoo on the right arm?
Yeah, I'm only. I wasn't. The original design that my wife wanted was no tattoos, so I talked her into this tattoo. And then I was like, well, it feels a bit empty now. So then I got this this anchor. I can't show you. I got this anchor over here. I was like, oh, it feels a bit weird. I might just, and it's sort of grown from there. But I think I'm done. It's too painful too. I don't know how many people have tattoos all over them, but packing the color in there is as painful as.
I'm still a clean skin, so I think these days the no tattoo is the new tattoo almost. So.
Well, yeah. Well, I feel like you should get your book covers done across your chest or something, though, like a walking ad.
Yeah. I think if I ever lose a bet, that's probably going to be the first tattoo I get.
Hey, I just had an idea. What a good idea for a podcast. Authors get their first tattoos, and while the machine's buzzing in the background, it's like Hot Ones, and you can interview them while they get a tattoo.
That is cool
That is actually
idea. So Harry, you'll be the first contender for that.
Yeah. How many authors would sign up? I don't think many. Hey,
we might wrap up with one. We might have one episode and
one and done.
All right, guys. I think we should pull the pin because Ben, you've been very, very generous with your time.
Yes,
we could probably chat for hours. Maybe we could get you back again and have a chat about some other topics as well.
I'd love it, man. I'd love to see you both at any in-person stuff that we're doing all together. I'd love to hang out. It'd be good.
No doubt. I'm sure we'll all cross paths again in the flesh for other writing. You often see the same people on the writing circuit, don't you? So
you absolutely do. Yes, absolutely right.
Well, Ben Hobson, you're a legend. Thank you so much for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure, and all the best with all your future writing endeavors. We'll continue to watch your career closely. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you, guys. It was an absolute pleasure of mine. I appreciate your time as well.